Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about the top 5 electrolytes that I bought on Amazon. And electrolytes have become a big deal in recent years because they're very important if you exercise, if you're sweating a lot, or if you're fasting or going keto or low carb, where you can lose a lot of electrolytes. So this year they're expecting the global market to be about $43 billion worth of electrolytes. And in the next 10 years, they expect that to increase to about $74 billion. And the need for electrolytes are usually associated with hydration, with energy, and with exercise. Those are some of the claims usually made. So I went straight to Amazon's top list and I just picked the top 5 electrolytes. And the reason there's a skip is that some of these brands occur more than once. So these were the top 5. And they are in order: Liquid IV, LMNT, Ultima, Noon, and Relight. So here are the 5 electrolytes. I bought them so that I could check them out. I could test them. I could try them. And I'm going to share a lot of the details about what they actually contain that you may want and maybe some things that you don't want. And because it's big business with electrolytes, there's some really big companies involved. So the owner of Liquid IV is called Unilever. And LMNT is owned by the LMNT company, but all the others have either been bought out or are involved with some large corporations. So Ultima is owned by an investment fund, and Noon is owned by Nestle, another enormous, huge processed food manufacturer just like Unilever. And Relight is owned by Redmond Group, as in Redmond Salt. It's a huge, huge corporation. And the reason I mention this is that whenever big business gets involved, even if these companies started smaller and had really good intentions, when it comes to big business and big corporations, oftentimes they don't hesitate to cut corners if they can save a few pennies and make a few percent more, and oftentimes quality can suffer. But there's one more product I wanted to include on Amazon, and that's number 292, called Ulight. And the reason I'm bringing it in to compare with the others is because it has some really interesting ingredients, and the second reason is that I developed it. So when you compare prices, you have to look at how many servings are you getting, but also what's in a serving. So this Liquid IV is 16 servings, the Relight is 60 servings, and the Ulight is 90 servings. But a lot of times people are comparing apples to oranges. So we have to figure out, what are we actually paying for? So we're going to take a look here at the different ingredients. And the main electrolyte to regulate fluid balance is sodium. And when we look at the different companies, we see that they all have sodium in varying amounts. And the LMNT has the most. It's almost a pure salt product, whereas the Ultima has hardly any. But when it comes to salt, it's the only mineral that we get plenty of anyway, because anyone with a salt shaker can buy salt for $7 for 5 pounds. That's for the high-end Himalayan salt at Costco. And you're going to be shaking salt on your food for the most part with everything that you eat. So while it can be important to replenish salt while you're sweating a lot, like when you're exercising, it is also something that you don't run out of immediately. That if you salt your food, you're going to still get some salt during the day. And some people actually need to try to avoid salt. The next one is potassium, and that's the other in the pair of sodium, potassium. Those are the 2 electrolytes that the body uses to regulate fluid and to regulate transmissions across cell membranes. So those are super important, and they kind of balance each other. So Liquid IV, LMNT, Ultima, Noon, Relight, and Ulight. So here the Ulight has the most, which is a good thing, but we also have to keep in mind that too much is not a great thing. So some people with heart conditions and kidney conditions, you could actually, getting too much potassium, you can unbalance. And there are some products on the market that have even a lot more, like twice as much as the Ulight. And the next most important electrolyte is called calcium. And liquid IV and Element T doesn't have any calcium in there. Ultima, Noon, Relight, and Ulite does have some, with Ulite having the most. But the thing to understand about calcium is that the availability and the value, what the body can actually do with it, depends a lot on the source. And when most people hear about calcium, they think about bones and teeth. But that's kind of the long-term storage. That's the long-term value over a period of decades. The most important functioning of calcium from minute to minute, it's why the body regulates calcium so tightly, is because calcium is a signaling molecule. It's super important for various forms of signaling, including muscle cramps and your immune system and so forth. But unfortunately, the most common form of calcium in supplementation is called calcium carbonate. That's also known as chalk. So if you write on a chalkboard, you're basically using calcium carbonate. And if you're talking about rocks like limestone, that's also pure calcium carbonate. And it's pretty sad that there's a product called Tums that people use for upset stomach, for digestion relief, and they were even proclaiming that as a calcium supplement, which is a farce. Because calcium carbonate is very poorly absorbed, especially in a low acid environment. So for people who usually need the calcium the most, like elderly, that they may not make enough stomach acid, and then they can hardly absorb any of it. But remember that the main value is as a signaling molecule, and then the calcium needs to be ionized. And the calcium carbonate is very poorly ionized, meaning it doesn't turn into the calcium ion, calcium plus. That's where it can actually do the work as a signaling molecule. And if we're including calcium as an electrolyte, then it has to be able to be ionized, because otherwise it's basically useless. So calcium carbonate, because it's poorly ionized, it has a very low physiological activity, very low biological activity. So a much better option is called calcium lactate, because calcium lactate is only one step away from calcium bicarbonate. And the best source of calcium would be if we could find calcium bicarbonate already in finished form. But we can get that in mineral water, but the doses are usually very low. But that's the best form of calcium because it's already basically ionized. But calcium lactate is rarely used because it's much more expensive. The calcium carbonate per unit weight has 3 times more calcium, but that's kind of beside the point if we can't use it. But because it's less concentrated in calcium lactate, we have to use a whole lot more, and that gets expensive. But it's worth it because it is highly ionizable. It turns into the calcium plus that we need, and therefore it has all of that physiological, biological activity that we're looking for. And again, if we include it in an electrolyte powder, we are looking for the electrolyte function, not to mineralize bone. We're looking for the signaling properties in calcium. So then we need to look at this calcium chart again and realize that the products that contain calcium carbonate are basically not useful as an electrolyte calcium. So Noon has calcium carbonate and Relight has calcium carbonate. So there's really just 2 products out of these that has any useful ionizable calcium. The next important big electrolyte is magnesium. And again, Liquid IV, the #1 seller of electrolytes on Amazon, doesn't have any. Element T has some. Ultima, Noon, Relight, and Ulite all have some magnesium, with Ulite at the top of the chart and Noon hardly having any at all. And while the source of magnesium, the form of magnesium, is important, it's not as important as the calcium that we just talked about, but it's still very important. So magnesium citrate is the most commonly used form, but there's other combinations popping up as well. So there's magnesium malate and there's magnesium glycinate. They're also very common. And all of these are okay. There's not one that is much better than the other in all situations. They all have different advantages. And the best form would be to get it from vegetables because there the magnesium is chelated. It's bound with amino acids instead of just with salts. But then some products use something called magnesium oxide, which is the cheapest, and it is very, very poorly absorbed. And that's a huge issue because magnesium is difficult to absorb as it is, and magnesium oxide is hardly absorbed at all. So when we look at this chart again, then Noon is the one that has magnesium oxide. So you can't really count the magnesium, or at least not the full value of it. So these are the 4 big electrolytes, and some of the products only have 2 of them, and some of the products have all 4. But there are additional minerals as well. So the electrolytes are the ones that are usually charged particles. They participate mostly in signal transmission and in fluid regulation. And we need them typically in hundreds of milligrams per day. But then there are others that have other functions, more as catalysts and cofactors, and we need them in very small amounts, but they're still super important. So we have zinc, we have manganese, and then there's a combination of trace minerals because there's a total of over 80 of them, and there's dozens and dozens that are essential for body function. And why we want to include all of them is because they work best in combination. When we just take one or a couple, we can tend to unbalance the others. So all the products have sodium and potassium. So Liquid IV, that's basically all it has. Then LMNT, Ultima, Noon, Relight, and Ulite have various amounts. So those are the most important electrolytes. But then we look at the complementary electrolytes. And again, Liquid IV didn't have that one. But magnesium is in all the others, except in Noon, it's a magnesium oxide, so it's not very usable. And then, like we said, when it comes to calcium, and we do a comparison, Ultima has a good amount, Ulite has a little bit more, and then the Noon and the Relight doesn't have an ionizable form of calcium. And then when we look at the zinc, we see that Ultima made an attempt. They put a tiny little bit of zinc in there, but it is not a very usable form. For these trace minerals, their unique function works by far the best if they're combined with an amino acid. That's called a chelated mineral. So in Ulite, it is a chelated mineral. It's a chelated zinc, whereas in Ultima, it's zinc citrate. And the same thing with manganese. They use manganese citrate. So they're not useless, but they don't have those unique properties that they get when you combine them with an amino acid. And out of these products, Ulite is the only one that has those additional trace minerals as well. So now we can see graphically what's in a serving, but how much does each serving cost? So for Liquid IV, even though it hardly has anything, it's $1.35 per serving. LMNT is the same price, $1.35. Ultima is around $1. Noon is about 50 cents. Relight is 70 cents and Ulite is 67 cents. So when it comes to cost here per serving, we see that Noon is the cheapest at 50 cents, but we can also see that there's very little stuff in there, that many of the others you could take half a serving or a quarter of a serving and get more than you get in a serving of Noon. But then some of these products also have things that you don't want in an electrolyte. So here are some dishonorable mentions, if you will. So Liquid IV has 50 calories in it. So I was asking myself, how does an electrolyte powder have calories? Well, of course, in this case, it's because they add a bunch of sugar. It has 13 grams of carbohydrate and 11 out of those are added sugar. And if we count the math here, we see that 13 grams at 4 calories per gram roughly adds up to 50. But 11 grams only adds up to 44 calories. So where are the other 2 grams of carbohydrate? So I went and looked at the ingredient list, and we see that the first 2 ingredients are cane sugar and dextrose. And dextrose, of course, is also known as grape sugar or pure glucose. So the first 2 things here are sugar, but there's nothing else on the list that is a carbohydrate. So that means that there is 2 grams of something in this product that is not accounted for. It's not disclosed on the label. And then I'm always curious as to what could that be and why isn't it on the label? The second dishonorable mention is LMNT. And again, it has 10 calories. So we go and look at the rest of the list to try to figure out where they're coming from. Well, it has 2 grams of carbohydrate, but 0 sugar. And again, we go look at the list of ingredients, but there's none of the ingredients that is a carbohydrate. So if you're really into electrolytes, you may have heard recently in the news that there's been a lot of turmoil around LMNT because they have found something called maltodextrin in there. And LMNT, when pressured, has admitted that there is up to 550 milligrams of maltodextrin in each serving. So what is this maltodextrin that makes up about 10% of their product? Well, it's a very common food additive in processed foods, and it is usually made from corn, and typically it's from GMO corn, unless it's a GMO-free product, a non-GMO product, which LMNT isn't. So we can suspect or assume that this is GMO, made from GMO corn. And it has a very, very high glycemic index. So sugar is about 65, table sugar is about 65 on the glycemic index scale, which is how quickly it raises blood sugar after being ingested. And glucose, which is kind of supposed to be the fastest thing there is, it gets in almost instantaneously, is the index at 100. But this maltodextrin is between 105 and 110. So somehow it's even quicker absorbed than pure glucose. It's right up there with jelly beans, which is like the fastest thing they have ever found. But then again, that's probably because jelly beans have maltodextrin in them. So this, of course, is going to spike your blood glucose some. And if you do it fasting, then even half a gram is going to spike your blood glucose some. But the point is that when people are fasting and they are insulin resistant, and that's the reason they're fasting, they're trying to reverse that, then they don't have healthy insulin responses. They have extremely exaggerated pathological responses to blood glucose. So even a small amount could create a huge insulin spike. And if this happens over and over, that's obviously not a good thing. And when they first found maltodextrin in there, LMNT admitted that there was 4 milligrams in each serving. As it turned out, there's several hundred milligrams, and there's up to 550 milligrams per serving. But the biggest question I have is, why is it not on the label? What are they trying to hide? Especially since they print on their box no dodgy ingredients, as if they were disclosing everything that's in there. And of course, if you don't disclose everything, that makes for a very short ingredient list that looks like this is a very pure product. But nonetheless, there are 2 grams of product, which is almost a third of the weight of the product, that is not on the label. And so we find out that 550 milligrams out of that could be maltodextrin, but then we have to ask ourselves, there's 1,350 milligrams left to get up to that 2 grams. So what are those 1,350 milligrams? is it something even worse? So here's some quick pointers on these products. We have Liquid IV and LMNT up at the top, and they taste great. I have to admit that, especially if you dilute them a little bit more than they tell you to. But again, how hard is it to make a good tasting product when you use a bunch of stuff that is used in the processed food industry like sugar and maltodextrin? And also, they have a bunch of undisclosed ingredients. We can't really find out what's in there. So because of that, I can't really recommend either one of those at all. Unless, of course, you're just looking for the taste. If you just want a serving of something that tastes good, then there's also Coca-Cola. You can just put a dash of salt in your Coke and you're not too far from there. And then we have Noon, and there's nothing horribly wrong with that product except there's just not much in there. You take a serving, but you're not getting all that much of what you were looking for. So as you can tell, some of these are hollow because they were poor availability sources. So it really just has 2 ingredients, and it doesn't come up to more than a half or a quarter of some of the other products. So I would put Noon as in 3rd place here. And when it comes to Ultima, they did put a fair amount of good stuff in there. There's not a lot of salt, but again, you can add some from your salt shaker if you want a lot of extra salt. And some of these ingredients are not chelated on the zinc and the manganese, but they do have 3 ingredients with a fairly good amount. What I noticed when I tried it though was that it sort of tasted like Jell-O. It tasted very synthetic and artificial. So to me, that would be a detractor because I'm all for sort of fresh flavors. And when something's chemical, it really hits me right away. Relight is kind of like Ultima in how much stuff is in there, except it's almost a pure salt product, of course, being owned by Redmond Salt, but it does have a fair amount of potassium and magnesium. The drawback again is that the calcium is basically in the chalk form that the body can't use, especially not for signaling. So with that being said, I would put Ultima and Relight at a tie. But then I want to mention the real reason that I got into developing a product myself. And that has to do with muscle testing. So in my clinic for 20 years, I've used muscle testing to evaluate people. And if you know how to do it, if you develop some expertise, it's a very precise method to tell what things are good for people or not. And when I had people bring in supplements that they had purchased on their own, and a lot of people were using electrolytes, I could never find one that passed muscle testing. And usually it was that they had natural flavors and natural colors, so-called natural on the label, but there's a wide error, there's a wide tolerance there for what they can call natural. So a lot of things that aren't really natural still slip by, and that's why none of them actually passed muscle testing. So when I made mine, I just wanted something that would actually be good for people. And as a clinician, you get very, very sensitive. When you look at people who are sick and they are so sensitive to different things, then you become very sensitive to the things that you give them and that you put into products. So I made sure that everything in Ulite passed muscle testing, every ingredient and the finished product. And since this video is about the top 5 electrolytes on Amazon, I'm not going to include Ulite in the ranking. I'm going to let you decide for yourself. And if you can't see the value, where the value lies, then I suggest you watch this video again, and I'm sure you can figure it out. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.